This podcast is presented in conjunction with the Waterfront Rotary Club in Cape Town. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of the club or Rotary International. If you would like to attend one of our online meetings, visit www.waterfrontrotary.org to request an invitation.
Good day all, and welcome to Not Just Business. Those of you who know me will know that I'm a pretty laid-back, grounded sort of guy that is not easily blown away by people. Well, let me tell you, our guest today is an exception. She's easily one of the top 10 most impressive young people I've ever met, and believe me, I've met thousands. So, no pressure, Rebecca. Welcome to this podcast.
Thank you for having me, and thank you. It's very kind of you to say.
So let's check the pronunciation of your surname. I'm a bit embarrassed to say that my isiXhosa clicks are shocking for a South African.
So my surname is pronounced Mqamelo.
That's what I thought. Mqamelo. Is the emphasis on the me? Mqamelo.
Mqamelo. Yes, I guess that is the correct intonation. Whenever people ask how they pronounce my surname, the click is the one part, and then the intonation is the next challenge.
Okay, all right. So, do they get it right? The friends that you meet around the world?
No, I would say, in the last 4 years, probably one or two of my friends from outside of South Africa have gotten it right. So I'm used to it by now.
So what do they normally call you?
Oh, goodness. I've had everything. Mqamelo, just long, silent pauses. Okay. Anything's fine. As long as you can say my name, okay. I don't mind.
I normally start off a podcast by saying something like, tell us a little bit about yourself. But in your case, even a little bit may take hours because you've packed so much into your, how long is it, 22 years on Earth?
22 going on.
Okay. So let's be a bit more specific then. Tell us about how you got into debating at school, because I have an idea that's where it all started.
Yeah, very much, actually. I think everything that I've done, I can in some way trace back to my debating. So I'd say it actually started in primary school. I'm a natural communicator. I think I've always been quite comfortable talking to people. And we had our local public speaking competition at our school. And that was something that I just always did every year, kind of as a default. But I really, really enjoyed it. And then when I got to high school, the natural next step was debating, which was kind of like public speaking, but a little bit more challenging in terms of improvisation, having to know a lot of information about absolutely everything. And I took to it like a duck takes to water, I guess. I was really lucky to be at a school where we had good coaching from our senior classmates. We used to go to lots of competitions. And so I would go to provincial competitions. I made the provincial team in the Eastern Cape, and then I made the national team. And that was a really interesting experience because I think not only in the public speaking and the confidence that it gave me, but it was also my first experience of realizing, oh, you can learn so much more outside of school from experiences. We'd go to these international competitions and we would be debating everything from the environment to Obama's foreign policy. And I would come back having 3 weeks of school and, I'd catch up everything in 2 days and think, why do I go to school? I learned so much more outside of it. And so it was very empowering because I think it made me learn that education can very much be a self-initiated thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what opportunities did it open up? Did you travel to other countries?
Oh, so many. Travel was a very big one. Yes, I went to my first international competition in 2015. I went to Hong Kong for public speaking specifically. I also went to Romania. Between then and by the time I graduated high school, I'd also been to Turkey, Germany, and the US. You had this experience of meeting other brilliant, intelligent students from all over the world. And we used to do these grueling debate camps. So a lot of people don't know this, but South Africa's high school debating is really, really strong. I mean, it's one of the best in the world. And we have fantastic coaches who are really, really dedicated and spend a lot of time not just teaching us the art, but I think teaching us so many life lessons along the way as well.
Yes, our Rotary Club here in Cape Town at the waterfront, we sponsor the Western Province schools debating. Unfortunately, that's since COVID has come to a little bit of a stop, which is probably not necessary. I mean, we can do it on Zoom, can't you?
Right. I mean, it's about speaking.
Yeah. Okay. So you said you missed some school, but you caught it up quickly.
Yes, I did miss a lot of school. I mean, when I think back to my matric, I can't remember being at school for say a 3-month period without having left for something. So, on the one hand, I would definitely say I did not have a conventional high school experience. And there's some times when I think back and I wonder, did I miss out on anything? But on the other hand, I think that the value that I got from debating was just so immense. And it's something that has really been beneficial to me up until now, and I think always will.
So this must have some sort of impact or into your choice of university. So tell us about Minerva, is that what it's called?
Yes, Minerva.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it had a very, very big influence. So the first thing is I remember in matric applying for the Alan Gray Scholarship and being asked what I wanted to do. And my friends and I, we were so confused and uncertain, and we're going through all the things like doctor, engineer, lawyer, what looks good on paper, what's going to get you the scholarship. And I knew at the time, and I know so many people go through this exact same process at the end of high school, you've got to sound good for the scholarship. I remember thinking to myself, I do not want to do any of this. I do not want to be an actuary. I do not want to be a civil engineer. My dad really wanted me to be that. I then came across Minerva through a friend whose brother had also actually been a debater on the South African national team. He'd been 1 or 2 years ahead of me. And so he had actually started at Minerva. And his sister was telling me, my brother Josh is going to be in Bangalore, and then he's going to go to London, and then he's going to go to Germany. And this is all part of his university program. He travels as he studies. And that to me just sounded like the best thing ever. It was like, well, this is what I've been doing. And I have experienced the value of traveling and learning as you travel. And so I applied. They had a very simple application process. One thing I can appreciate about Minerva is that they don't care about standardized tests. They don't require the SAT. They don't require you to fork out thousands of rands just to get an application in. It was something that you could do online. They had a virtual video involved. I did that. And then I got in. And then the next hurdle, of course, was financing the whole thing. It was very difficult to go to my parents and say, look, I've been given the Alan Gray Scholarship where you would be paying absolutely nothing. Here's this Minerva tuition where even on financial aid, you would be paying the equivalent of a full year of varsity in South Africa. And kudos to them. They've always been very supportive. I think they've always known that you can't put a price on education. You can't put a price on experiences. And they had seen what the traveling and debating had done for me before. And I mean, it's amazing that they agreed. And I'm very, very grateful because looking back, I think it was the best decision that I could have made.
So tell us a little bit about it. You travel all over the world with this university. This is your undergraduate thing as well.
Yes. So Minerva is unique in a couple of ways. The first one is that you do travel as you study. So every semester, you're basically in a different country, which is insane. And then there is the flipped classroom model. So at Minerva, you don't do lectures. Everything is online. I don't even want to liken it to a Zoom class because that it really doesn't capture it. It's far more interactive. They've got their own proprietary software. So it basically feels like a virtual classroom. And yeah, as I said, you don't get lectured. So professors are not allowed to talk for more than 5 minutes at a time. What you do is you teach yourself all the subject material beforehand. And then classes, which are usually 90 minutes, would solely be used for discussion, problem solving. And just to illustrate, if I were to ask a question in class, I will never be given the answer by the professor. Their default answer would be, oh, okay, Derek, why don't you tell us what you think? Can you answer Rebecca's question? So it's very much being taught by your peers. And that's really changed how I think about education. I mean, now when I go to conferences or odd occasions when I've visited friends in universities elsewhere and I sit in on a lecture, it's so passive. It's mind-blowing to me that people can learn like that, to just listen to someone droning on for 3 hours. I don't think that's how you're meant to learn. There's a lot of emphasis on active learning. There's a lot of emphasis on applying what you do in the real world. So we don't write exams. That's another huge perk. We are rather scored on our class interaction and then assignments that we do, which are often location-based as well.
I must tell our listeners, you write, I'll refer them to your blog later, give them the address. But you write beautifully. Tell me, in one of your blogs, I think you wrote, that not all the students find this moving around, every semester to a different country, find that some of them find it very challenging. What are the pros and cons of this sort of lifestyle?
Look, pros, I think, are pretty obvious. Being able to graduate as an undergrad and to have lived in 7, 8, 9, 10 countries around the world is not something that everyone can say. The teaching experience itself at Minerva is unparalleled. I think, we have this amazing exposure to different networks and organizations around the world. The downside, which I'll focus on more because maybe this one is not so obvious to people, is that it's really not normal to pack up and leave every 4 months. It's really not normal to go to a different country that speaks a different language and has a completely different culture periodically and regularly in this way. And it often feels like just as you're getting used to it, you hit that 3-month mark and you finally know your way around things and you've made some local friends. And then it's like, oh, I'm leaving in a month. That has definitely been hard. I mean, it's been hard in relationships. You form a community and then you're gone and you don't know whether you'll ever see people again. So there are definitely trade-offs to this lifestyle. I think it makes sense when you're young. But I can tell you that after graduation, I'm really looking forward to being in one place. And I think it's going to be a challenge. I mean, when I go home for the holidays, this past lockdown, I was home for 5 months. By month 2, I was going crazy. It was weird to be in one place for so long.
What are your most memorable experiences of this traveling experience around the world?
Oof, that's a tough one. Honestly, I think the one that I will always remember the most is my time in Korea. I love dancing, so I love Latin dancing, salsa, bachata. This is something that I've taken with me in every city that I go to. And I remember just marveling at the feeling of, I'd do my internship during the day and I would take class. So, I was working as I was doing my classes and I was working at this crazy biotechnology and 3D printing. And so I'd get to tinker around with electric circuits all day. And then at the end of the day, I would go straight to my dance classes. And when I tell people this, it's quite strange because you wouldn't think that you would find this vibrant community of Latin dancers in a place like Korea, but it's huge. And I think this is kind of indicative of an experience I've really had in every city, which is you never really know what a culture is like until you get there. There are these niche pockets of people who share the same passions and interests. And if you're interested in something, it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter whether you're in Hyderabad or South Korea or Argentina, you will find people who do that. And so it's a nice reminder of just, we all like the same things.
What was the most difficult thing to deal with anywhere in the world?
I think that's the sense of stability that I just talked about. It's a really, really big thing. People underestimate how having a routine is something that's really grounding. And it's been the most difficult, but I think also maybe the biggest learning experience that I've had in the sense that I now come to value really simple things like waking up and having a morning routine. Because no matter where you are in the world, if you have the things that you do at the beginning of the day, simple things like that can make a huge, huge difference just to your sense of stability, your sense of groundedness. Because it's strange to just wake up in a new place every couple of months and then think, okay, what is my life going to look like here? So it's like on the one hand, you get this opportunity to start over, to try out new things, try out new habits. But on the other hand, you know that whatever you do build up is going to be disrupted by the constant movement.
So besides being a student, you're involved in a couple of interesting tech companies. Just tell us about those.
Yeah, I'm involved in probably too many things for any student who takes their studies seriously. So I've been mentoring a startup in Ghana. This is something that I started doing last year. They're an insurtech startup, and they basically offer insurance software to brokers and insurance providers in Ghana. That is one organization that I work closely with. Another one is Grassroots Economics in Kenya. I wouldn't call them a tech startup. They're more of an NGO, but they have been pioneering community currencies, which is basically cryptocurrency, but in a development form or the development purpose, where they go into communities and basically allow them to create their own forms of currency. And so my undergrad thesis, for example, is a randomized control trial that I conducted with them. So my relationship with them is very much around data analysis, communicating what the network does. And then finally, Zerion, which is kind of my main job, if you can call it that. Zerion is an investment interface for decentralized finance. They're very much on the cutting edge of things. Decentralized finance, I'm not sure if everyone knows about it, but it is a very interesting niche within cryptocurrencies.
When I hear DeFi, I think of stoves. But now you tell me, but now you say decentralized finance.
I have to use the full term, explaining it to family as well. I could go into what DeFi is if you'd like.
Briefly tell us what it is, or give us an example of how it works.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to do my best here. Decentralized finance is about programmable money. So think cryptocurrencies, but a little bit more interesting in the sense that it's a bit like money Lego. So imagine being able to create a token, cryptographic token that can enable you to lend, can enable you to invest in things like derivatives or ETFs or automated trading. The idea is that you don't have an institution or a person doing this. It's all on a protocol, which is basically just a piece of code that lives on the blockchain that tells the blockchain what to do when certain conditions are met. And not only is it about the programmable aspect, a really big part of DeFi is also the fact that it is permissionless. So again, there's no decentralized means that there is no ownership. When I use an app like Zerion, like know your customer or KYC process, there's no bank involved. You own your own money and anyone can build anything within DeFi. So there are far fewer barriers compared to centralized finance. And it's a bit like money Lego in the sense that everything is very composable with each other. You can hop from one app to another without having to create a new user account. So it's very interesting. I think the best way that I could describe it is think of what the internet did to traditional media and see DeFi as disrupting traditional finance in the same way.
So the users of this, don't you sometimes feel that you're too far ahead of the pack? The guys using this don't understand it so well. So acceptance is, did you find that frustrating?
First of all, it's not all guys, but I will say within any new technology, adoption is always going to be, in the beginning, it's always going to be the people that get it, right? The people that are building it. But I also think we should change our understanding of what adoption means, right? When people think of crypto and they think, oh, this is something for people who want to make money and, Bitcoiners and that kind of thing. I mean, the work that I do with grassroots economics, that is crypto. It's just that the people using it don't necessarily know that. They're all trading on a blockchain, but to them, it feels like they're just trading on their phones, right? They don't even need internet access to use this thing. So there are some really interesting examples where we take this high technology and apply it in a very low infrastructure context, and it can work. You can abstract away the complexity of it if you have a product or a device or form of money that works differently and works well.
So you recently gave a talk at Princeton University entitled Preparing Africa's Youth for the Digital Economy. Well, first of all, struggled a bit to get my head around this 22-year-old from the Eastern Capital Village speaking at Princeton. But anyway, what were the key points you made in that talk?
Well, I think the main thing was that, we do live in an era where technology is available to us, and the potential that it has to disrupt business models, to empower people is immense. I think one thing that, having spoken to Africans from all over the continent, one thing that we can all agree on is none of us ever felt that we were properly prepared for this. I mean, if I look back to my schooling, yes, there was IT offered. No one sold me the value of learning to code, things like that. So a really big focus of the talk was just on education. Normalizing these things, making people who come out of high school and university feel prepared to use the tools that are available to them. Because one thing that we also know about technology is that it does amplify inequalities, right? If you compare, say, Silicon Valley to, all right, let's take where I'm from, Mthatha, it's very, very different. Like if I were to try and find a blockchain club in my hometown, I think it would be very difficult to do that. I'd probably have to be the one who starts it, actually. So yeah, the education was a very, very big one. Then the second one is also just being able to recognize opportunities. I've been very lucky to have worked in places like Kenya or Ghana, and I'm always just blown away by the kinds of things that entrepreneurs are building, but they often don't have the financial support that they need. I think this is another huge inequality that is being addressed slowly, perhaps not fast enough when it comes to where funding goes, specifically for things like tech companies and tech startups. The amount of funding that goes to African countries is a fraction of the total funding worldwide. And on top of that, I think this was a 2019 report, but the majority of funding that goes to African startups from foreign VCs is going to companies that are 90% of the time are owned by expats. So that's another thing to think about, right? Where's the money going? Who are the people building these things? Sense of ownership is really important when we think about Africans using technology to solve African problems.
So on the one hand, we have some disadvantages in Africa in terms of readiness for the digital economy. But I'm sure there are some things that Africa can teach the world. Am I right? What might some of those things be?
Oh my goodness, so many. If we want to talk about just in the realm of business, I think building business models that fit to context, there are so many examples of that. The most obvious one that I've just spoken about is grassroots economics, right? Like no one would ever think that there are roughly 40,000 Kenyans trading cryptocurrencies every day and buying food with them and embodying probably the best kind of use case that we can have for this technology, right? What was it created for? It was created for people who live in places where currency volatility is an issue. And when there's this alternative, people building businesses off that, right? Look at women's groups creating their own form of currency using community currencies. That's another huge thing. I remember also when I was in Ghana, this is slightly different, but just sort of the attitude and the challenges that are overcome. I think this is a huge, huge lesson. We underestimate how we take for granted the comforts around us. You know, when I'm in San Francisco, I have my fast Wi-Fi and my nice public transport. I remember being in Ghana, stuck in traffic for 2 hours with a meeting that started half an hour ago, trying to take class on my laptop, on my spotty network, on my phone, getting stopped by the police. Just these day-to-day things that people get through nonetheless. I think that's tenacity, that's resilience. And that is so, so important.
So as I said earlier, you write beautifully. Your writing is impeccable. I don't know where that comes from, but...
Thank you.
So one of your blogs, which particularly interested me, was entitled, "Is Growth the New Enemy of Prosperity?" Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a backstory to that, which is that in 2019, I was invited to an economics conference in Bretton Woods. And if anyone listening to this is an economics student, they'll know that Bretton Woods is where the original gold standard was adopted in, 1973? Might have got the date wrong there. But this conference specifically was about reimagining Bretton Woods, right? I mean, the gold standard was very quickly dropped by the 80s with the Nixon reforms. And at this conference, there was the author of a book called Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, and his name is Doug Rushkoff. And he does a lot of writing where he basically criticizes a lot of the startup investing culture that so many of us idolize. And I think in Africa a lot, when I speak to entrepreneurs working in Silicon Valley or getting funded by a VC in Silicon Valley is kind of like the gold standard, to use that pun, right? It's like once you've done that, you've made it. And it's kind of the standard that we use in terms of how we build business models. Now, this article that I wrote as a response to the book by Doug Rushkoff, "Is Growth the Enemy of Prosperity?" is an exploration of how business culture has actually changed, how we see value, and maybe the ways that it can be a little bit more harmful, right? Because right now, a lot of businesses simply exist because they want to get acquired, right? The value is not to customers. The value is to investors. The value is to shareholders. And if you look at the majority of the big businesses in the world, right? The Ubers, the Amazons, the Facebooks, they are extractive and highly, highly exploitative. They are parts of their supply chain that we wholly ignore as consumers. And so this attitude that getting 10x growth in 5 years, the question is at the cost of what, right? At the cost of what in terms of your labor processes, your production processes, at the cost of what in terms of when you're a business and you go into a new local economy, right? Walmart has done this so much in the US where local businesses are just absolutely cannot compete. And this goes to, I think, just a broader issue within the global economy and monetary system that we have, which is that money tends to flow outside. Money tends to flow into abstracted financial vehicles that don't actually reach people, right? Trickle-down economics is a very grand illusion. And I think that the kind of obsession with growth at a business level has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I sometimes get a little irritated when funders ask for, the first thing they ask an entrepreneur is, what is your exit plan?
Exactly, right?
Why? A guy like Steve Jobs, I remember, I think he said something like, when I was 19, I made $1 million. When I was 20, I made $100 million or something to that effect. He says, but for me, it was never about the money. And Elon Musk is the same. I think it's about the idea. So
Yeah.
we can have hours of conversation on that, I'm sure. So moving on, about a year ago, you wrote an article for the Sunday Times. I found that fascinating. There's a picture of you smoothing the floor of a hut in the village. So that is certainly a long way from your friends in Silicon Valley. To quote you, coming home is like putting on a parallel universe hat where all my trusted mental frameworks crumble in the face of collective duty, or what I call the black tax of cultural preservation. That's profound. What did you mean by that?
So many things. I wrote that in January 2020. I had been home for the December holidays. And I'm from the Eastern Cape. I'm from Mthatha. My father's Xhosa. If we're in the Eastern Cape over December, we go to the village. And Xhosa culture, June and December are kind of the times of the year where all the ceremonies happen, and, because everyone's on holiday and the family's home. And this has been an aspect of my life since childhood where, you'd go to the Mqidis, which are the traditional ceremonies. You sit in the hut for hours and hours and listen to the old people drone on and on. And I say this with a smile because I think every time I've come back home and I've been in those situations, I mean, like you say, it's so far away from what I'm used to. Or not what I'm used to. I mean, it's so far away from what my life looks like now. I can be in Tokyo, I can be in Silicon Valley, I can be in London, and then I go home and I'm in the village and I'm just cooking with the woman, or I am smoothing the floor of a hut with cow dung. The contrast is huge, is really big. And I think there's always this kind of jolt when I get back home of, wow, life is so different here. You are forced to slow down your pace. And I think it's a really, really good thing. It's a really, really healthy thing to realize that while I am, got my head in cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance and startups and disrupting everything back home, right? Someone still has to herd the cows. Someone still has to cook the meal, make the tea for the old people that come to visit. So that's one side of it. But I also don't want to romanticize that, right? I talk about the black tax of cultural preservation. I think when you are someone who has been really, really lucky, really blessed to have all these opportunities, of course, there's the burden, right? People talk about black tax in financial terms, but I also think that there's black tax in cultural terms. For me, I mean, I've always had to kind of exist at the bridge between two worlds. My father's Xhosa, my mother's white. And on the Xhosa side of my family, there's always a sense of our ways are being lost. I come from a family that does practice traditional African spirituality. So these are things that, for me, I have to try and integrate in some way that makes sense in my life, which is already so varied. And I have so many vast experiences, not only in terms of culture, but also just in terms of what I am exposed to as a young person. And so this is something that I would never say I've figured out. I think in writing that article, it's also just me trying to express some of the things that we as young people or as young African people have to juggle, the things that maybe we don't talk about as much, right? Like often you meet young, successful South African, it's always about what they do, what business have they started. No one's going to ask you, how are you managing all of this stuff in terms of how you relate to your family, how you relate to your own culture. And that kind of thing is important, but it is nuanced and it is difficult. And we don't talk about it nearly enough.
That's very, very interesting. So, Rebecca, you've been blessed with superior intellect and obviously great communication skills. And on top of that, very good looks. That's a great package. And of those three, I believe the great communication skills are the most important.
Absolutely.
So how much of your success would you describe to your gifts as opposed to just sheer hard work, ambition, and determination?
Nature versus nurture. I think you're right in terms of the confidence. The confidence, it's the magic that glues everything together. I can think back to so many times where just the confidence that you have with people, comfort that you have talking to people, no matter who they are, no matter what position they're in, can go a very, very, very long way. I've been brought up to never think that these things are mine. Of course, yes, there is hard work involved. You don't just get given gifts and then you do nothing with them. They have to be developed and cultivated. But I mean, like I said in the beginning, I've always felt comfortable talking to people, right? I don't know where that came from. Did it come from my parents? Did it come from maybe just growing up in a family where I was listened to as a child, right? I mean, your environment shapes you in really big ways. So I mean, of course, this feels like a cop-out answer, but it's always going to be a combination of everything, right? Life gives you things and it's about what you do with them. And that's something I'm very aware of. And I see it not just in terms of my talents or my confidence or my opportunities, but also where I am in life right now and what is possible, I guess.
So here's an off-the-wall question, or out-of-the-sky question, actually. If you were a drone watching yourself for a few days, hovering and just going about your normal thing like you normally do every day, and you watch yourself for a few days, not trying to change anything, what do you think you would advise yourself about the things you need to work on?
I like that question. Two things stand out for me right now. And this is really, I'm like, as you say that I'm being a drone on the last couple of days, is one, I think I need to learn to work more efficiently. I'm a very A-type perfectionist personality, which means sometimes I get so lost in the details and getting the details just right that I lose track of the bigger picture. And this is definitely true for my undergrad thesis right now. It's like, you've got to work smart. And I think there are methods and techniques that you can learn. So that's one thing I would really love to get better at. And then the second thing is I tell myself this constantly, but I need to find more white space. I need to, whether it's meditation, whether it's socializing with friends, you have to have balance. Sometimes it's important to just force yourself to do nothing. I'm so aware that in the last 4 years, and I think this is true for a lot of people my age, we're on screens all the time. There's always deadlines. There's always work to do. And we forget that going for a walk is such a nourishing activity. Simple things, small things. I really want to find more time for them.
You're currently in San Francisco because it's your last semester, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Where do you normally call home? Is that a tricky question?
That's a tricky question. Home, in terms of where I grew up, Mthatha, Transkei. But I think home can exist along so many dimensions. Of course, right now, home is the space that I've created for myself here in San Francisco. I don't have a very strong attachment to a physical place. I think at this point, put me in a new country, give me 3 weeks, and it'll be my home, right? Home, country-wise, will always be South Africa. I want to live in South Africa at some point after I graduate, and hopefully full-time. But at the same time, I'm also aware that sometimes opportunities call you elsewhere. And let's be honest, we live in such a digital connected age. I think it's less about where you are and it's more about the people that are your community. And those people can be all over the world.
Mm-hmm. What is your vision for the future, for yourself and for the world?
Right now, my real passion, my interest professionally, academically is decentralized finance. I really do think that it is a revolutionary technology, but what it needs is people who can apply it in the ways where it would have the most impact. So my vision is to see more examples like grassroots economics in other African communities, right? I'd love to see something like this in South Africa. I'd love to see more people having access to money, because money is not just about wealth or easy exchangeability. Money is really about empowerment. It is about access. It is about freedom of speech. It is about inclusivity. And so when you get down to the philosophy of money and you look at what's happening right now in terms of how we value things, I think it has the potential to change how we interact as human beings in the same way that the internet did, for example. So that is really my vision, is just to continue working within this field, to continue pioneering new projects, being able to communicate them to people that maybe are not in the space, but making it make sense. I think that is really important and overlooked. And yeah, just to be a happy human being. I mean, we live in a complex society. There are so many distractions. There are so many pitfalls for young people. If I can just get my 8 hours of sleep every day and eat healthily and have a family and people around me that love me, I mean, what more can you ask for?
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, Rebecca. I'm going to refer people to your blog because, well, they can find it in the show notes because I'm going to struggle with that Q again. Rebecca
Mqamelo. You can just spell it out. It's my name and surname.com.
Yes, yeah. They'll see that on the notes. Thanks very much, and all the best for the rest of your studies and in changing the world with DeFi.
Thank you so, so much. I really appreciate you having me here.
Enjoy your day, and I'll enjoy my night. Take care,
All right.
Rebecca. Thanks
Cheers.
very much. Eh?